Yes, despite added tariff costs, U.S. wholesale prices for farmed Atlantic salmon haven't spiked in the dramatic way some expected. What's happening instead is a reshaping of trade flows and competitive positioning. It's not a simple pass-through of tariff costs. So I'm going to walk you through why that is and how Chile, Norway, and Canada are each uniquely positioned in this environment. So let's begin with Chile. Chile is the dominant supplier of Atlantic salmon to the U.S. Here in this U.S. import chart from our trade portal, and Chile is in blue. Chile accounts for roughly 70% of U.S. fresh Atlantic salmon fillet imports. This was for July, just to give some perspective. So it makes its behavior especially important in how pricing evolves. So when we look at pricing, starting in April, making sure that's all viewable on the screen, around week 15, Chilean salmon became subject to 10% tariff coming into the U.S. Now, while pricing did edge higher initially, the market was already in an upward trajectory due to increased seasonal demand heading into Mother's Day. After that holiday peak, demand historically tapers, and at the same time, we saw excess volumes coming into the U.S. So even though demand saw upticks from Lent and Valentine's Day and Mother's Day this year, it wasn't as much of a lift compared to previous years. This combination prompted a correction, not because tariffs weren't significant, but because seasonality and oversupply had a stronger immediate influence than the tariff costs. We saw this play out throughout early summer as the market entered its slower demand season. Prices softened through June and July before stabilizing more recently. Production patterns shifted across major supplying regions and tightening available supply, which I'll get into in just a bit when I jump into Norway. But since tariffs took effect, Chile has strategically shifted more focus towards Brazil and China, where there aren't tariff risks and returns are often stronger. However, the U.S. remains a very important market, not because it offers the highest margin, but because it absorbs the largest volume, and there's no other single market that can replicate that. Now, looking at Norway, the origin where we've seen some dramatic price volatility this year. Norwegian salmon became subject to 10% tariff rate before increasing to 15% in August. While you would expect that a higher tariff rate would push prices significantly higher, what actually happened was that prices swung sharply up and down throughout 2025 as Norway responded to a complex mix of biological, seasonal, and global market forces. And strong production set the stage. Norway entered 2025 with unusually strong biomass due to an exceptionally mild winter. There were warmer temperatures, fewer biological challenges, and expanded vaccine use that meant that there was a higher share of fish harvested this year that were superior grade, meaning more product was entering the fresh market rather than being processed and frozen. So this improved quality made Norwegian product very attractive to U.S. buyers that are willing to pay a premium for consistency. As a result, U.S. import volumes of fresh Norwegian salmon fillets are reporting higher on a year-to-date basis compared to 2024, despite those tariff pressures, and you can see the elevated volumes here. So tariffs introduced added volatility, not a straight price increase. When tariffs were introduced in April, Norwegian prices initially spiked heading into Easter week when limited harvest activity was creating a temporary squeeze. But within just 2 weeks, prices collapsed, dropping over 20% on fillets as more volume entered the market and seasonal demand eased. This kind of set the tone for the rest of the year, a series of sharp rallies followed by sharp corrections, driven by a combination of tariffs, export volumes, and global demand shifts. Throughout the summer, heavy Norwegian export volumes kept downwards pressure on U.S. prices, even as tariffs moved up to 15%. In August, when the tariff took effect, Norwegian prices actually fell to match Chilean levels. By September, the market turned again. Chinese demand surged ahead of Golden Week, and that was pulling larger fish out of the European and the US markets, driving prices sharply higher. So with Norway, it isn't just tariffs made product more expensive. It's that tariffs added a new layer of volatility and uncertainty to this market. Pricing has been driven far more by export pace, Chinese buying behavior, and biological conditions rather than tariffs alone. And despite the increased import volumes this year, I am hearing from contacts that buyers are pulling back because of this, the extreme price swings out of Norway. But we're still seeing plenty of import volume there. And now turning to Canada. Chart looks a little bit different here, but I will get into that. Canada is a supplier that until now has held a significant advantage over other origins. Canada has benefited from tariff-free status under the USMCA trade agreement, at least as of today's webinar, and I'll get back to that shortly. Its proximity to the US allows for fast, fresh delivery, and the majority of Canadian salmon enters the market as fresh whole fish, which traditionally commands a premium due to its quality and logistical efficiency. But unlike Chile and Norway, Canada's story in 2025 has been driven less by policy and far more by biology. Throughout 2025, Canadian producers endured some of the most challenging farming conditions. We saw mortality events triggered by warming waters, low oxygen levels, harmful algae. There was a sharp surge in sea lice infestations, forcing emergency harvesting, and that resulted in heavy volumes of product entering the market. These emergency harvests forced producers to accelerate harvesting, which temporarily flooded the market with supply right as demand was seasonal and soft. And that contributed to sharp price declines, which is why you also see those dotted lines over the last few weeks of Canadian assessments. So our methodology only allows us to provide assessments where there is adequate spot market trade taking place, and we cannot report product being bought under duress. So while assessments may be temporarily removed, we still continue to speak to market happenings in our commentary. So despite the biological disruptions and volatility, the tariff exemption allowed Canadian product to remain competitive and maintain a foothold in the US market alongside Chile and Norway. However, that advantage is now under threat. On October 25th, President Trump announced his intention to impose an additional 10% tariff on top of Canadian goods. And it remains unclear whether seafood will be included, but this announcement has introduced a major uncertainty at the exact moment that the Canadian industry is already strained. So looking ahead, the medium-term risk is significant. If tariffs are applied, Canadian suppliers may need to raise prices or shift volume towards markets where they have tariff certainty, such as Japan and Asia under the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. Some contacts have reported that the emergency harvested fish were currently at or near full market size, but that a large share of volume was set to be harvested in the middle of next year. So while emergency harvests are behind us, the full impact may still be seen into next year.
Hey, Lorin, can I just ask you a couple questions real quick?
If you shall. If you must.
Well, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that the fear that 10% tariff might be applied to Canadian goods. We went through that earlier, and there was a lot of paranoia that the tariffs that were going to be applied to everybody else would hit Canada. And then right up to the last moment when the White House said, no, it doesn't apply to seafood. I guess we can't count on that every time. It seems like we are just living by the moment. The last time when that happened, by the way, we saw snow crab imports spike because I think they thought, oh, the tariffs are coming. We've got to get the product into the country. I don't know what's going to happen this time, but that seems kind of scary to me.
Yeah, one of the biggest thing that I've noticed from the first round of tariffs that we went through in Trump's first term versus this one is that the industry is much less reactive to these announcements. When they announce something, they're not immediately making moves, making shifts. They're waiting until it's absolutely confirmed, because things have shifted back and forth so much. So there's much less reactiveness this time around that I'm seeing.
We'll find out if that was wise or not, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You focused a lot on fresh here, but frozen salmon pricing is reacting a little differently, isn't it?
Yeah, so frozen salmon moves on a much longer sales cycle. That means pricing is a little bit slower to react in either direction. We did see pricing firm on frozen salmon from Chile and Norway when tariffs went into effect, but we also saw them fall and soften when we got into those slower demand seasons. So we're still seeing the ebbs and flows of pricing, even with the tariffs in effect there.